You're listening to The Wild Initiative Podcast Network. Learn more and check out all the shows at thewildinitiative.com.
You're listening to the Fish Untamed podcast, where we talk all things fishing, conservation, and the outdoors. Today on the show, I'm joined by Landon DeKeyser, host of the Fishing Podcast. All right, welcome to episode number 10 of the Fish Untamed podcast. Today I am talking to Landon DeKeyser, who hosts the Fishing Podcast. Now, the Fishing Podcast is a little different from a lot of the other podcasts out there in that it does not focus on one specific style of fishing. There's a lot of fly fishing podcasts out there, a lot of spin casting podcasts out there, but Landon talks to anybody and everybody who likes to fish. He doesn't narrow himself down to just a specific technique. And as much as I like to fly fish now, most of the time, I grew up with a spin rod and I still pick one up occasionally. So I can definitely appreciate where Landon's coming from when he doesn't want to narrow himself down to one specific technique. So we get into a little bit about fishing in Michigan, which is where he lives, and then a little bit about his show and what's in store for the upcoming season. So without further ado, here is my chat with Landon DeKeyser. I just like to usually start with asking you kind of how you got into fishing in the first place.
Yeah, so really pretty much since before I can remember. I mean, everybody in my family fished. So, you know, I can actually remember like where I went fishing the first time. It was a place that we camped all the time called Brevoort Lake up in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, if you're familiar with Upper Lower. And it was something that I was always pretty obsessed with. I used to drive my dad completely nuts. I would ask him to take me fishing every single day, like even if we went the day before. So yeah, you know, both my grandparents on either side, great grandparents fish. So it was just part of my life, but I don't know, I've taken a little bit stronger interest than most people in my family even. I would say for most people it's kind of a hobby, and me it's really an obsession, as my wife calls it. But I don't know, I think obsession is like kind of a bad connotation with it, but
like a positive obsession.
Right, exactly. A passion. That's the word I like to use.
There you go. So it sounds like it's kind of a combination of the way I feel like I either hear people say, you know, my dad was super into it and kind of dragged me along, or, you know, my parents weren't interested, but I had a bug. But it sounds like you did have a pretty solid introduction to fishing as a kid, but you just kind of took it and ran with it a little bit more than the rest of your family did. Yeah.
I mean, if I'm not working or hunting in hunting season, that's what I'm trying to do, is be out on the water somewhere.
Sure. And did you grow up with conventional gear, I assume?
Yeah, I really didn't start fly fishing until really mostly in the last like four years or so. I got my first fly rod, I think, when I was 10, and fly fish for bluegill and stuff and bass sometimes. But most of the time, yeah, conventional gear. And I still fish quite a bit of conventional gear. But I don't know, probably fly fishing about half the time anymore.
Okay, yeah, I was going to get into that. Maybe this is a good time, but obviously, as a little bit of background, you host the Fishing Podcast, and I definitely want to hear about how all that started and kind of where you see that going. But one of the things I really appreciate about it is that it's kind of all over the board. And I know you've mentioned that that's kind of why you started it, because you couldn't find anything that fit what you were looking for. But as someone who I grew up with conventional gear, and I've been talking about this quite a bit lately. As much as I fly fish most of the time now, I still, when I go home, I still pick up the spin rod and I still enjoy it. And I can appreciate someone else who's not, doesn't identify as one or the other, who's just like, I like fishing, any kind of fishing.
Right. Yeah. I would say I'm definitely a multi-species, multi-tactic angler. It's kind of the constant process of learning and doing something different that I enjoy.
Hmm.
And if you pick just conventional or just fly fishing, there's so many different parts of fishing that you kind of pigeonhole yourself away from, I guess.
Right. So do you find yourself choosing the technique you're going to use based on what you're fishing for or where you're fishing? Or is it more like I'm in the mood to fly fish today, so I'm going to fly fish, or I'm in the mood to throw spinners? Or
that depends. So this summer I had a goal that I wanted to catch 5 brown trout over 20 inches. In Michigan, that might not be all that hard if you know where to go and know what you're doing. But the caveat to that was I wanted at least one to be caught on a mouse at night.
okay.
And another one had to be on a streamer to kind of force myself to do those two things. So this year it was a lot about that, a lot of streamer fishing and mousing, specifically to try to like accomplish that goal. And I did, but let's say in a normal year where that wasn't going on and I hadn't set a goal like that.
Mm-hmm.
To me, it's more about the body of water that I'm
Okay.
fishing, and possibly if I've fished there before. So, not knocking the guys that they want to fly fish and that's the only way they want to catch a fish. A lot of my friends are like, yeah, but what if you would have caught that fish on a fly? Like, I don't really care how I caught it. I'm still pretty happy.
You caught it.
I caught it on spin gear. It doesn't bum me out in that way.
Right.
So if I'm going to go to a small body of water that's really hard to fly fish, I'm probably going to use spin gear. I cover more water. I get to see more, catch more fish, and that's more fun to me. The larger bodies of water, that's where I like to get the fly rod out and streamer fish and try to pick up fish that way. And I think it can be really just as effective, given the right conditions as spin fishing.
So what's your ideal, I guess, body of water for each of those techniques? I know, each of these is broken down into, different kinds there's different kinds of fly fishing, different kinds of spin fishing. But
Mm-hmm.
when you're choosing between, let's say, spin gear and fly gear, what water body features are going to dictate which you choose?
Some of it has to do, I guess, with like the river surroundings too. If I have an open space, because I'm not the best fly caster in the world at all. If I have a lot of room to use a fly rod, then I will.
Okay.
That's one of the biggest factors. But I guess, are you talking more so about like why I use it, or maybe like structure in the river or different types of bodies of water?
I guess that, like, when you walk up somewhere, what makes you say, like, oh, this would be better on spin gear, oh, this would be better on fly gear? Because I feel like I'm more the type who chooses it based on what I'm in the mood for. Like, when I go home and I'm like, oh, I'm fishing for all the things I fished for growing up. Like, I just want to grab a spin rod and, like, relive the good old days. But out here, I generally pick up a fly rod just because I'm in the mood to, not because of the species I'm targeting or the water I'm fishing.
Yeah, no, mine's definitely not. I'm usually just in the mood to catch fish, and I'm like, what would be the most effective way to go in here and catch a bunch of fish today? To an extent, I'm not trying to catch 100 trout in a day on spinners. But if it's, so one thing, like if you're looking at a really small creek and it's pretty fast, it's got a lot of elevation change, you're probably going to have a lot of log jams and a lot of riffles. And so in something like that, you're casting into such small pockets. That's where I really like to use spin gear. And because you can make a 5-foot cast and still get a decent presentation in a very, very small pool of water. Sometimes there's really big fish sitting in a hole that's, maybe 4 foot across and only 4 foot long, but for whatever reason, there's a log across the river or there's a bend and you get a really deep pocket under there. If the water's flowing over that really fast, even with weighted fly line and, a big lead head streamer of some kind, it's hard to get that down into there to where the fish is actually going to come out. And want to attack whatever you're putting in front of it. Whereas if you do have a spinner or a sinking Rapala, like the countdown Rapalas, then you can get that down into that hole really quickly. So it's more just about what's going to be more effective on that body of water.
Okay.
But the one thing I will say is I started doing this a long time ago when I very first started brook trout fishing. We used little tiny MEP spinners, but we'd always cut the treble hooks off and put a single hook on there. And you're going to hurt far fewer fish, because one of the big complaints you hear from fly guys is like, why do you want to put a treble hook in a trout's mouth? And I 100% agree with that. And you don't need a treble hook on these lures. You can take that off. You can put a single hook on there. And I even do that with the Rapalas too. So I'd change them out to inline hooks that are, like they're just called inline hooks, I guess. You can look them up. VMC has some really nice ones. They don't sponsor me or anything, but those are the ones I like to buy. They're super sharp. And I can send you a picture or something of it too. But I don't notice any difference in catching.
That was going to be my next question.
Numbers of fish. It's like some days I'll go out and hook every single fish I catch, and some days I don't. And that's kind of always how it was, even when I didn't switch out my treble hooks. So I would highly recommend that, and it's way easier to get the fish off the hook.
Oh yeah.
You don't get it tangled in your net. You're spending more time fishing. So
for sure. I mean, I'd never heard of that before, but that makes total sense. I've never really done much like gear fishing for trout, but even fishing for bass, especially when you've got some of those lures have 2 or 3 treble hooks, and it's like one hit the mouth and the other 2 are just like lodged in its face somewhere, and you're just like, this is completely overkill.
Yeah, I agree. And I mean, granted, fish like bass, they're a lot tougher. They're not as delicate, but still, I've seen some bad things happen, even smallmouth fishing on the rivers and stuff too. So
yeah, because especially those bass, I mean, they'll hit something much larger than they probably should, because they're just so eager that you might have a lure that's like coming halfway back on its head. But you said you do mostly brown trout, steelhead, and smallmouth.
Yeah, those are really where I spend most of my time. Usually from right now, after I'm done deer hunting, usually after opening day gun season, I'm done for the year. I hunt a lot in bow season. And then it's back to fishing, and I steelhead fish pretty much. Last winter, that's all I did. I actually didn't ice fish at all, which I'm going to ice fish this year, because that's how I put fish in the freezer, is catching panfish. And steelhead fishing is more just for fun. And then I'll steelhead fish into the spring until about April or May, and then I kind of slowly transition into chasing brown trout again. Because for anybody that's never fished in Michigan, a lot of our rivers actually close to fishing, even catch and release fishing for a good portion of the year. And those are a lot of the rivers that I like to fish for brown specifically.
Are they trout streams specifically that close, or is it just a river by river basis?
Yeah, only the trout streams will close. If it's not a designated trout stream, you can fish there all year.
Okay.
And there are non-designated streams in Michigan that do hold trout, because they might flow into the same river, or could have been planted there years ago and the DNR doesn't track them anymore. Who knows? But it's just the trout streams that close.
Now, do you mostly fish for brown trout because that's what's there, or do you prefer them for some other reason? Like, are there rainbows and stuff in the area as well?
Yeah, we've got rainbow trout. Michigan, for some reason, doesn't have like a lot of big rainbow trout. There's rivers you can go to and catch tons of them, but it's not as common to catch a large rainbow trout here, unless you consider steelhead rainbow trout.
Sure. The biggest of the big.
Yeah, then we have really big ones, but there's just a lot more brown trout, and I really like fishing for brown trout because they're so aggressive. Mm-hmm. And I I fish for brown trout to see them come out and hammer, a streamer or whatever I'm fishing with. That's the exciting part is when they come out on, 100 miles an hour out of a log jam and just smoke a streamer and take off with it. So that's the biggest reason I chase them, but I do like to do a lot of brook trout fishing.
Okay.
That's really what got me into trout fishing, because I grew up like the most southern part of Michigan with very little to no trout fishing at all. So it was mostly bass, bluegill, pike, that sort of thing. But when I was probably in my late teens, even early 20s, started brook trout fishing up in the UP with my cousin Dustin, and I was like hooked instantly. It was like, where can I find more of these fish? Like, where do they live at? And then, of course, that led me to finding that there was a lot more brown trout in the southern part of the state. So I was like, okay, well, I'll go try to find some of these. And one thing led to the next. And now I'm really just a complete addict when it comes to trout and steelhead fishing.
So did you end up catching the brown trout you were trying to on the Mouse?
I did.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. I actually, I completed that goal plus one. I think I got six browns this summer. I'm trying to think of what I caught the rest of them on. I know a couple came on Rapalas, and I don't remember what the first one I caught on a jig and wax worm the first day of the year, actually January 1st.
Oh, awesome.
We were steelhead fishing, and I had just caught my personal best steelhead, and then the very next cast caught a 22-inch brown, which was a complete surprise in that river because you don't catch many of them.
So not a bad day, sounds
yeah,
like.
It was a good start. I had a kind of a head start almost to my goal.
So it sounds like you caught your, was it 5 brown trout you were trying to catch, like all on different kinds of techniques?
Yep, exactly.
That's pretty cool. So tell me about ice fishing, because I have a lot of experience with spin gear and lures, and I have a lot of experience with fly fishing, but something I'd really like to do and have not gotten to do yet is go ice fishing.
So ice fishing is fun, but it is not in any way exciting. Well, there are exciting parts, obviously, but for the most part, you're standing on the ice, fishing through a tiny hole. To me, it's more of a social thing because you can go with a bunch of people.
Yeah.
You can have 2 or 3 buddies go out there with you, and if the fishing's not good, at least you're hanging out and talking. Whereas if you're fishing out of a boat, a lot of times you can only have 3 to maybe 4 people, and then you're crowded. Waiting's obviously tough to really fish with people and have like quality conversation at the same time. So that's probably one of my favorite things about it is you can have as many people as you want. You can go out there, have some beers, cook lunch out there, make a whole day of it. And then I also, honestly, what draws me to go ice fishing is the fact that I'm bringing fish home. Because bluegill, perch, walleye, they're all very, very delicious, catch them fresh, and they freeze well. So that's how I get most of my fish for a good portion of the year. And the one thing I'll say that I really like about ice fishing that is very exciting is tip up fishing. That's
what I was going to ask, if you are using tip ups, or that's like the one thing I know about it is if you like that's an option to use tip ups.
Yeah, and tip ups are fun because you can be fishing with one rod and catching bluegill and perch, and you set these tip ups, which is, for anybody that doesn't know, it's basically just a thing with a spool line you set on the ice, and that spool goes down into the water, and it has typically a flag that comes over, and that's like that's what holds that spool from free spooling. And then the fish come along and take your bait and swim down with it, and that sets the flag off, and the flag stands up, and then everybody yells flag, and everybody starts running over to the fish, depending on how far away it is. You don't want to run up too fast because you want to let the fish take it, but if it's a long ways across the ice, you can start running over there, and then as you get closer, you slow down and you watch to see if like the spool is turning, and if it is, it's really exciting, and you go over there and you pull the slack out of the line, and then as as soon as you feel it kind of go tight, you pull really hard and set the hook. And hopefully, if you're lucky, you have like a great big pike on is generally what we're trying to get on tip ups. But you can use tip ups for all types of different fish. We use them for walleye, actually use them for perch, in places where you get the big jumbo perch. So yeah, it's fun. It's kind of like trapping and fishing combined. Yeah, sure. So the reason is you're usually taking a hook and you're setting it down, somewhere in the water column, like maybe right above a weed line or on the outside of a weed line, around some structure where a pike might be living, or whatever fish that you're fishing for. And you have a weight that goes down there, and you're putting like a big shiner or sucker minnow on a hook generally. And then if a pike comes by in the middle of winter and there's just a fish barely swimming there, they're opportunists. So a lot of times they can't pass it up and make a meal out of it, or try to.
True. Second question is, are you basically like hand lining these fish then once you hook them? Like,
Yep.
Are you pulling it in by the, is it like a rope or?
Yep. Well, they do actually make different types of tip ups where it has a fishing reel on it. I don't have any of those. I'd like to get one. You actually put like a pole in there, and then you can pick it up and reel them in that way. But generally a tip up, it's just like a spool of line, and when you pull the fish back in, you just hand over hand pull it back in.
Now, are there laws, like I know out here, and I'm pretty sure several of the other states I've been to have laws that discuss like how many rods you can have in the water, like how many lines you can have in the water at a single time. Do tip ups count as like do you have to pay more for like an extra rod fee or anything like that to have them all going?
No, you don't have to pay for them, but they do count as an extra line.
Okay, and you don't have to pay for extra lines. It's like, do you have a maximum number of lines that you can have out?
Yeah, I always fish with too, but I think I'd actually have to check the regulations on this, but I'm pretty sure you can have 3 most anywhere. No.
And is that 3 including like if you have a tip up, but you're also sitting next to a hole with a rod in the water?
Yep.
That one also counts. Yeah,
anything with a hook that you have in the water is considered a line. So it doesn't necessarily have to be a rod. It can be a tip up. Those are really the only ways I can think to fish in Michigan offhand, because you can't use like jug lines or trout lines or like do any kind of weird stuff like that here. Okay. Unfortunately.
So do you do any fly fishing for any of these other species like pike or anything like that?
Smallmouth I do.
Smallmouth?
Yeah, smallmouth. I mean, they're a ton of fun to catch on fly gear. They're aggressive in the areas you catch them. They're usually more abundant than trout. And they fight harder, honestly. So I grew up doing a lot of smallmouth fishing on the little rivers and creeks and stuff. And that's really the only type of fish we caught in rivers back then, or tried to catch. Obviously, you've got suckers and carp and stuff, but we never chased those. Although I did go fishing for carp this year on the fly, and that was really fun.
Did you have any luck?
I did. I caught one early on in the day, and that was all we got the whole day. It was pretty tough conditions that day because you're sight fishing. So if you don't have the right sunlight, if there's chop on the water, it's really tough. And you're just trying to put this cast perfectly in front of them, and they're really picky about the take. So it's quite technical, actually, and that's what I liked about it. But you're seeing the fish and casting to them, so it's you can always see what's going on. So you're like, oh, I almost got it, and it just keeps you going all day and making cast after cast.
So is that river carp or lake carp? This
was like in like a reservoir, really, on a small lake above a dam. So there is some current in it because it's not like a big enough lake that it stops it. But you could do it in either, though.
What kind of flies are you using for that?
Honestly, nothing really they're just kind of like a brown egg sucking leech,
Okay.
I guess. They have like a little red head and just brown instead of a black, and they kind of have some little legs coming off them, almost like a shrimp imitation, I would say.
Okay.
Nothing really special looking. You look at it and you go, that's what you use. Okay.
So I assume that the way because that sounds like it would be eaten by nearly any species of fish that's large enough to take it. I assume that you're just getting carp on it because you're targeting the carp, like you're casting right in front of it versus just blind casting, at which point you'd probably be catching anything else that sees it.
Surprisingly that day we're talking about that. We're like, I'm surprised we haven't caught something else.
It sounds in the wheelhouse
a little
of
bass or like a bluegill, and we didn't. We didn't the entire day, so that was odd. Because there's no reason why other fish wouldn't eat it. But yeah, blind casting to carp that way would be really, really tough. It's, you're really trying to find one that's feeding, and you can tell they're feeding because they kind of tip their back up and they have their nose down and they're like rooting around in the water and stuff. Mm-hmm. And those are the ones you want to cast to. And I actually have a whole podcast episode if somebody wanted a lot more details on it. And John Lee, the guide that we're talking with, is super knowledgeable. But it's almost weird the way they act, like, and you can tell like when they're like looking at it and they kind of get excited almost, and then they slurp it up, and then that's when you set the hook. You watch the whole thing happen, and they'll come up and do that sometimes, and then like right at last minute reject it.
Okay.
They just decide, yep, you know what, I don't think that's food for some reason, I'm not going to eat it. They're pretty smart.
So do you ever feel the take, or are you all just kind of going off of their mannerisms?
Yeah.
And just setting it when you see it?
Exactly. It's really just all sight and mannerisms. Now, there are like mirror carp are a slight different variation. And I guess they are more aggressive. And if you go up to like fish them in the northern part of the lower peninsula, on the flats on Lake Michigan, I guess they're more aggressive, and they will actually kind of come and hit the lure and take it. Okay.
Yeah, I assume so I have a couple of friends. We used to go fish this, Bass Lake together, and it had carp in it. And I had one or two friends who did catch carp by accident. They were just stripping something back in. And those I know, because they were stripping back in, they felt it. Because, they go to pull, that spooks the carp pulls, and it would, like, their rods were almost yanked out of their hands because they're expecting to catch like a largemouth or something. Right. And so, but it sounds like that's just that was just, dumb luck. Versus,
I'm sure it happens. I'm sure it happens. You'd think for how many carp there are around and how much I fish, I would have caught some more of them at some point. But
I still haven't caught my first one, so I feel your
they're
pain.
Smart fish. They're definitely undervalued for a sports species, I would say.
Have you ever eaten one? I've heard they're not bad.
I have not eaten a carp. If somebody else was going to kill it and clean it and cook it up, I would try it.
Okay.
But I don't know. I'm kind of I'll eat anything. I'm not a picky eater, but I'm picky in terms of what fish I would take home.
Just based on the species that you just feel weird about and species you don't?
Yeah, well, and what's available.
Okay.
Sure, you could probably cook carp to taste just fine. If you know how to cook anything, you can make it taste good. But why not take the fish that are incredibly easy to cook?
And easy to catch.
Right. And I don't like cleaning big fish, like even walleye. I don't like to keep anything over like really 17, 18 inches. The bigger ones, I don't like to eat as much. They're not as thick, or they are way thicker, so they don't like cook as evenly. Mm-hmm. I don't know. The little ones are good.
How do you usually cook your fish?
Man, all different kinds of ways. If I could only cook them one way, honestly, I'd probably pick like deep frying them and eating them with tartar sauce, because it's just so good that you can't go wrong.
Right.
But I try to get creative with it. So I do usually keep a steelhead or two a year. And with those, I've like baked them different ways. Sometimes a lot of times I just kind of make up crazy recipes. But I'll make like a like a teriyaki sauce from scratch, just with honey and what's the other ingredient for teriyaki? Soy sauce. And mix that together and marinate it with some seasonings and stuff in there, and then not pan fry it, but cook it in the pan. Mm-hmm. And that's really good. That's probably one of my favorite ways to eat steelhead. But and then I make a lot of fish tacos last year. I had caught a bunch of whitefish around this time of year, and they're delicious. They do have some fat and stuff you have to clean off of portions of them, but it's really good. A lot of people just smoke them. I really like. I'd smoke something else. I'd smoke a steelhead before I'd smoke a whitefish, honestly. But yeah, fish tacos I made a lot last year, and those are super easy.
So when you say you cut the fat off, is that the kind of fat that like makes them taste muddy? Is that whitefish?
I'd say more fishy. I'd say fishy. Like any fish really has like like the red line of fat that goes down their vertebrae. And I always cut that off, even on walleye. If it's kind of thick, I'll even cut it out. Okay. Just because that's where that really like oily flesh is, and the oils is really what contains most of that fish flavor. And if you're not like, some people are like, oh, I don't really like fish, and then they eat my fish tacos and they're like, okay, those are pretty good.
Yeah, fish is one of those flavors. It's like I really like the taste of fish, but the moment it crosses that line of too much tasting like fish, it's like terrible. It's not a flavor you want in excess.
Right. Yeah. Like salmon out of the Great Lakes, you really got to get all the fat off them because they're fishier, in my opinion, than the salmon that are from saltwater. I've had salmon, even like salmon that's fresh, it's silver, out of Lake Michigan, that it didn't taste good even when he did clean it right. I still ate it, but it was like, that wasn't the best salmon I've ever had.
I'd never heard of a comparison between Great Lakes salmon and saltwater salmon, so that's good to know. I wonder what causes that.
Probably their diet, I would say, and I think just the saltwater in general. I don't know about you, but I think saltwater fish in general is better. Like,
I agree. Yeah.
I haven't had too many saltwater fish that weren't good, come to think of it.
Yeah, and I guess I might be biased in that the only saltwater fish I've really had, I've gotten like at a store, and I feel like they're not going to sell if there's a gross saltwater fish out there, they're not going to sell it at the store. Whereas freshwater fish usually have more access because like you might know someone who caught one.
Right.
So I might have had a wider variety of freshwater fish than saltwater fish, but I'd agree that in general, I think the saltwater fish tastes better. Yep. Is a steelhead similar to just like the rainbow trout in its flesh, or is it more like a salmon?
It can kind of depend on when you catch them. Okay. So, they're similar to a salmon in the way that when they come out of the lake, they're fresher. Yeah, and then as they're in the river longer, their meat kind of loses its color. If you catch like a really colored up buck that's been in the river since fall and it's now April and he's just almost black, you really probably don't want to keep that fish and eat it. Their flesh gets like really light colored. So yeah, they are similar in that way.
Okay. So tell me about your work with BHA.
Yeah. So I am on the board for Backcountry Hunters and Anglers here in Michigan, which for anybody that doesn't know, in short, is the voice of public lands, a nonprofit organization, which has a simple but complex goal of protecting public land for really anybody. So it's hunters and anglers that are a part of the group mostly, but they're protecting public land that anybody can go enjoy, from, mountain biking, hiking, walking their dog. So it's a great program because we're really lucky to have the public lands that we have, especially, in some states, Western states. Michigan has tons of public land, and a lot of people take that for granted and don't realize that it costs a lot of money. So anytime something costs money, there's politics around it, and there is a very real possibility of big chunks of land, going up for sale and never being open to the public again. So the goal is to protect public land. And I help mostly with like events and stuff that we're putting on around in the state. I'm not the most knowledgeable when it comes to like, what legislations are going through.
Sure.
Which is actually why I got involved with BHA, is because they make it really easy to understand different bills and how they affect, outdoorsmen and what the long-term effects of that could be. So it helps me to quickly identify like, okay, this is a good bill, or maybe I need to look into this one a little bit more. And then usually it also makes it really easy to contact the people that you need to talk to oppose it. You can call all these different elected officials depending on what the issue is and what your concern is, or maybe it's something you're supporting and you want to voice that too.
Mm-hmm.
But who do you call, right? Usually if there's a specific issue, they have a link that will take you to the exact person that you need to talk to. If it's within your district, wherever it might be, you can call them, email them, and have a conversation with these people. And I think that's one cool thing that I've actually learned through BHA is like there are people out there and their job is to actually listen to the public. A lot of people think, oh, the government's not going to do what I want. And sometimes they don't do exactly what you want, but there are people there that are actually taking your opinion into account.
Yeah,
So
I agree.
It does matter.
Yeah, I'm always surprised because I agree with you in that BHA kind of opened my eyes to how accessible my representatives were. And like you said, kind of understanding these bills that it's much easier to care when it's written out in plain English versus whatever jargon they were using before.
Right.
But I'm always really surprised when because I'll use their, forms or whatever to send in, a message to my representatives. And I always get a message back from them.
Yeah.
That's not, it might be like a form email that they've sent to everybody who was on my side of the fence, but it is definitely catered to what I said. It's not just a form email like, thanks for contacting us. It is I appreciate you reaching out about this specific issue. Here are my thoughts on this issue, and like I'm going to be serving your best interest. So yeah, I always am really surprised when I find out how accessible people are.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and like there are open office times you can go in and actually talk to those people face to face. You can call them. And yeah, I wasn't aware. I guess I always knew you could do that. I just didn't know how easy it could be.
Yeah, same. So I feel like we should probably switch over and talk about your podcast, since that's how I came across you. If you just want to give like an elevator pitch, and maybe we can dive into what you've done so far and what season 2 has in store, maybe. Yeah.
So I've been slacking a little bit and I've not put out any new episodes. Been recording some, but life has been incredibly busy for this past summer, especially, and then into the fall. And I've got some good content coming out for sure. I'm excited about season 2. I've got some new ideas. Honestly, so I want to make the podcast something that other people enjoy and they want to listen to. And listening to a lot of people's feedback, they wanted to hear more of the same things that I've already done. So we're going to do a lot more steelhead and a lot more trout and a lot more smallmouth. Actually, I want to do a lot more smallmouth this year because we didn't really cover smallmouth much last year. Mm-hmm. But that's what really people are asking for. So I'm going to try to do a lot of that type of content, but I'm still going to mix it up too and do some different podcasts on, weird random things. Like last year, we went on vacation to Panama and did like a saltwater trip with a guide, and that was really fun. So there'll be things like that again too. But as for why I started the podcast, I got into listening to podcasts not all that long ago, maybe like 4 years. I'd heard of them, but I kind of was just like, it sounds weird. Why would I want to listen to a podcast? Like, what's that all about? I don't know. I kind of am one of those people, anything new comes out and I kind of oppose it for a while until I realize it's something worth getting on board with. And I listened to like a lot of different like business related podcasts and then hunting podcasts. And then I had listened to different fishing podcasts, but I couldn't find one that I really liked. Like I was like, well, I like, some of this one and some of that one. But really what I was looking for is variety in one show. Because even though I spend a lot of my time fishing for different things, I'm always thinking like, man, it'd be fun to go catch this kind of fish, or I'd love to go to this location. So learning about all those different places in different types of fish was really the inspiration for starting the podcast. Because I figured, you know what, if there's not a podcast that gives me exactly what I'm looking for, I can just start one. And cover all those different topics that I would think is interesting. And I know there's a lot of other multi-species anglers out there that think like myself. So even though it's a podcast that covers a wide range of topics, I don't think it's for everyone. It's still kind of a niche in a way, because some people are only into fly fishing, so they don't really care about conventional, or some people are only saltwater, so they don't care about anything freshwater. And that's great. Fishing's all about spending time outdoors and enjoying it, and whatever it is that drives you to go out there and do that, whether it be one species, one method, that's great. But I just fall into that multi-species category. So that's who I would say the target audience is. I think there's a lot of great episodes that if you're a streamer fisherman or a trout fisherman, then you would probably listen to that one and maybe skip the other episodes. There's a lot of hunting podcasts where I do that, where it's like, I don't really hunt hill country in Vermont, so I'm going to skip this episode because there's nothing really to learn there. If I go there someday, maybe I'll go back and re-listen. But yeah, I guess it tells you a little bit about the podcast and why I started it and what's coming up. It's been a lot of fun though. I've met really cool people through it so far and made some good friends. And that's always a plus, because the people that you spend your time with are kind of determines how your life is. If you're surrounded by good people, then usually life's good. So
yeah, for sure. I feel like with a podcast like yours, so when I first found your podcast, I really liked the kind of attitude you had around it, where it's just like, look, I don't want to categorize anything, I just like catching fish. And like you said, that's almost a niche in itself. When it sounds very general, but most people aren't that general. Most people kind of focus in on one technique or another. And when I first heard that, I was like, I don't know if this is for me, because I do mostly fly fish now. But then I listened to a couple episodes and I was like, you know what? I grew up not fly fishing. And so I understand what you're talking about and I can relate to it. But also, there's so many aspects of fishing that don't have anything to do with the technique you're using. I mean, 80% of the battle is just finding a fish and knowing how that fish is going to behave and what it's looking for. And at that point, how you present that, bait or fly to the fish is just the last little bit. Getting to the fish and reading the water and understanding what this fish is looking for is most of the battle. And to hear a podcast that might not be the specific technique I want to use, it might still give me a ton of information about that species and what that species is looking for at any given time of year.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that 100%. And sometimes it's the little like puzzle pieces that I took from this puzzle, but they somehow fit into the other puzzle I was trying to solve. Like things that I've learned spin fishing have definitely helped me be a better fly angler. Or somebody might be talking about a specific species that I've never fished for, and they point out something that fish did, and like that, why they do this. And I realize, that's why this other species I fish for does that same thing. Or, at least points in the right direction. Fishing's like a puzzle that you'll never quite finish. And, there's a bunch of pieces missing anyways.
For sure. And if you deliberately exclude a bunch of different techniques, you're basically leaving those puzzle pieces out and trying to solve the puzzle
Yeah.
without them when you could totally use them to your advantage, even if you don't want to partake in that specific activity. I feel like that whenever I'm trying to explain kind of reading water to people, you know, when you've been fishing long enough and you can look at a river and you just like know what spots look fishy. You can't even say like why. You're just like, there's a fish in there. And I feel like that, you know, all that knowledge that I have was gained fishing for smallmouths, but it's like I can still use it for fly fishing for trout out here. Completely different water bodies, completely different species, but I can still look at a river and be like, that's a fishy spot, even if I can't explain it. So I think, having that generalist mentality is just, I think more people need to be open to that.
I agree. Yeah. Yeah. The more different areas you dip your toes into, you know, that's just more information for whatever else you're going to go out and chase the next time.
Right. Have you found any species in Michigan that you never target on the fly because, like for example, I know a lot of people don't fish for like walleye on the fly because they hang down real low and it's just a little harder than some of the other species. But do you have any species that you're like, this is the only technique I use? And not even just fly, but like where you only use one technique?
I mean, I would say with salmon, I pretty much only like go trolling out in the big lake for them. So
okay.
I've got friends and relatives that have boats, and you just go out there and drop lines down and drive around. And I don't do much river fishing for salmon. So that's one example of one technique I would use. As far as fly fishing goes though, that's still, you know, that's kind of a new venture for me still. So there's a whole bunch of fish I'd like to catch on a fly, I'd say is the bigger problem. But I probably wouldn't try to catch a sturgeon on the fly.
Fair enough.
I've never caught a sturgeon at all, though. I'd love to. That's definitely on my bucket list.
Do you know what sturgeon, like how you fish for sturgeon?
So there's different, I don't know much about it. So to warn everyone, there's different ways to do it though. I know. And like a lot of people will go over to, like the St. Clair River where it goes into Lake St. Clair, and it's like super deep out there. It's like 100 feet deep or something crazy. I don't know. I'm making that up, but it is really deep. And you just drop like lines with some type of bait down to the bottom and just kind of sit there and wait, like fishing for catfish, I guess. So it doesn't sound like that much fun from a fishing standpoint, but the catching standpoint would, I think, make up for that.
Yeah, I'm sure once you hook one. I wonder how often you hook one though. I
don't think it's something you go out and expect to catch several in a night. I think if you go out and get one or two, that's a good night. Okay.
Maybe similar to like muskie fishing.
Yeah. I'm not 100% sure, but it would a low numbers game. That I do know.
Have you caught, or at least gone fishing for, the grayling that have been reintroduced to Michigan? I know very little about it, but I know that they were trying to reintroduce grayling to Michigan.
Yeah. So I don't think, last I knew they had not planted them.
Okay.
So I have not, and they have tried to plant grayling in Michigan before, and it failed. So they're trying this completely new method where I think they're raising the eggs and then they're putting them like in cages in the river at first and then letting them out. I don't know. I can't remember all the details. I have read about it quite a bit, but it's been a little while since I looked into it. So no, I haven't got to do that yet, but I definitely will give it a try. If they open up, I almost feel like they should not even allow fishing at first, like close that section of river and try to get them started. But
because they were there before, right? They were, yeah. So do you happen to know why they have been failing, like putting them back in their native waters?
Well, so much has changed in Michigan since they were in the rivers. There's not any one exact thing that they can say this is what caused them to go extinct in Michigan. I think it was a whole bunch of different factors. Logging was a huge one. So, they went through and they clear cut most of Michigan a couple of times. And as I'm sure you know, that does all kinds of terrible things to rivers and raises water temperatures and puts a bunch of sediment in the river. So their natural ecosystems that they were living in changed greatly. And then the other big thing is Michigan used to pretty much be mostly swamp. Like it was most of even the farm country was very, very swampy, but due to all the irrigation, they've really kind of drained most of it. So I don't think the water is of the quality that it used to be almost anywhere.
I see.
And they introduced so many different species. Now salmon they didn't introduce until way after the grayling were gone, but they did introduce brown trout in almost every river in Michigan by the early 1900s to mid 1900s. And they live in the same streams, and brown trout are typically the dominant species around here if they're in a river system. You'll get some pike and stuff in the rivers with them, but I would say for the most part the main predator is brown trout that are residents, at least in many of those rivers. And I think so much just changed. They just couldn't make it anymore after their habitat was gone. Competition for breeding areas, I'm sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it seems like the brown trout, pretty much everywhere I've been, tend to start to dominate wherever they've been planted. I mean, they can coexist, especially with like rainbows, but I feel like you don't see a lot of brown trout with sensitive species. Yeah, that's true. Like where I brook trout fish, it's very rare to catch a brown trout and vice versa. There are some rivers that you can go and catch a brown and a rainbow and a brookie and all in the same day, but those are, rare and special rivers. Yeah, for sure. We've got a spot out here that has grayling, and it's grayling and cutthroat, and they seem to coexist pretty easily. But cutthroat, I feel like, are in the same boat where they're the first to go if anything else is introduced. So it kind of seems like the grayling and the cutthroat, like bottom of the totem pole, they can survive together, but neither one would probably make it if a more aggressive species were introduced. Right.
And I don't know, do they spawn in the fall or spring?
I have no idea, honestly.
I don't either.
I want to say spring, because and I could be totally wrong about that, but there's the spot that I've fished for them before, I believe there's a closed time that is around the time I went, and I think I went in June, so I would assume that spawning had happened just prior to that, but I could be totally off base. But that would be my best guess.
Write in and tell us.
Yeah, I'm sure someone's pulling their hair out.
Yeah.
Well, do you want to share where people can find you and your podcast if they want to check it out?
Yeah, so the podcast is a super creative name, The Fishing Podcast. So if you go to thefishingpodcast.com, that's got all the episodes posted on there, a very basic website, but it's got every episode on there, so you can click that and go to the different. Honestly, there's so many places that you can listen to podcasts. People tell me, they're like, oh, I listened to it on this app, and I've honestly never heard of it. The program I use just broadcasts it out to all the channels. I'm assuming the same way yours does. And pretty much if there's a app that has podcasts on it and you look up the Fishing Podcast, it should be there. If it's not, definitely let me know, because I'd be interested in making sure everybody can listen to it. But I'm on Instagram. Instagram's probably the best place to get a hold of me. I spend more time on there than anywhere. And the Instagram is The Fishing Podcast as well.
All right. And do you happen to know when season 2's starting?
Very soon. I told somebody I would definitely get an episode out before the end of the month here. So it's November 19th today. So I've got a handful of good ones. I'm just trying to kind of decide what's going to come first in the flow of it for the kind of the season. I want to try to keep things a little bit more seasons based this year. So like, for example, I've got a smallmouth episode recorded right now, but I think I want to release that like in June. So there'll probably be a lot of steelhead stuff coming out here. And then I want to get some more ice fishing episodes. So, because that's one of those things I've done all my life. I'm no expert at. Sometimes I catch some fish, sometimes I don't. I don't really know why. So I'm interested in maybe becoming a little bit better ice fisherman too. So yeah, very soon before the end of the month, and then it will probably be a weekly thing until summer of next year. And then I think I'll probably take another break to focus on fishing, really. I started fishing less when I made the podcast, because in the summer, I don't like where we're at in Michigan. We're so close to the time zone change that in the summertime it stays light here until like 10 o'clock.
Oh, really?
So in the summer, I'd fish a lot after work, because if you get out of work a little bit early, you can fish for 4 or 5 hours in the daylight.
Yeah, it's a hack for fishermen. Just live right on the time zone line.
Yeah. Yeah, and you go to Chicago, it's really not that far west of us, and it gets dark an hour early there almost.
Yeah, I've noticed, because I've been trying to balance, trying to keep up with a podcast as well as fishing, but I just try to make sure all my podcasts are on weekdays, especially in the winter, because I'm like, I get off work and it's dark in an hour. I got to cram them all in during the week, so at least I have the weekends to go out. But I know if
I was more motivated, I would probably try to record all of them in the winter, because you really don't have too much else to do. You can ice fish in the dark, but that's a hassle.
Yeah, you can just save it till summertime.
Right.
All right. Well, Landon, thanks so much for coming on. I really appreciate it. And happy to learn about all the different techniques that you've used. Yeah, it was great being on. It was a good conversation. I really enjoyed it. So if you ever get to Michigan, let me know. I will. I've got plenty of people to go see over there. I feel like you guys have so many hunters and fishermen in Michigan. Yeah, lots of good fishing too. I'll definitely point you in the right direction. All right. Well, thanks so much, and have a good night. Thanks. Have a good one. Bye. All right, and that'll do it. As always, if you liked what you heard, go ahead and go over to the Wild Initiative podcast. You can subscribe there and get my episodes every Thursday, as well as all of Sam's other episodes throughout the week. You can find my episodes on fishantamed.com, in addition to weekly backcountry fly fishing articles. And you can find me on social media under Fish Untamed on Instagram, or my name, Katie Bergert, on Go Wild. And I will see you same time, same place next week.